Hi, this is Sarah Olivieri, founder of Pivot Ground and creator of the Impact Method. Today, I want to share with you a special tool that I have built that hopefully will get you started on beginning to really think about your numbers in a new way. I think that financial leadership is so important, and too many people are afraid of numbers, afraid of where to get started, and it leads to just kind of neglecting what is a fundamental part of operating your nonprofit. So there's two pieces to financial leadership. One is being a good steward of the assets that you already have. That has to do with bookkeeping, making sure that you're spending money wisely, tracking where your money is essentially. But the other piece, and the piece that's actually going to really move the needle forward for your nonprofit, is thinking about the future of your finances and the various, what I call financial levers that you're able to have an impact on. And in order to understand the numbers better, it's really helpful to have a tool like a spreadsheet that I'm sharing with you here, where you can look at your numbers and actually play with your numbers, adjust some things. And oftentimes, when you have a great tool, some very interesting and surprising things may reveal themselves about how you could be running your nonprofit to make a bigger impact. So let's dive in. You can download this tool if you haven't already from our website, just following the link. And the first thing you're going to do, this is built in Google Sheets. You can also use it as a Google Sheet, or you can download it as an Excel document if that's the tool you use. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to File and either make a copy if you're going to use it as a Google Sheet, or go ahead and download it as a Microsoft Excel document. Once you've done that, you're ready to go. I've put some sample numbers in here, but you could just delete them and start to do your own. So I'm going to give you the lay of the land. We have a few tabs down here. The first tab is the summary of your overall nonprofit. And then I've put in some sample program tabs, and they are connected. So if you see here, the program revenue is linked over to this school program tab. All I've done is double click on the box to see what the formula is for this number. And then finally, we have this human expenses tab. I'll go over both Program A. Program B is exactly the same as Program A in this case. I just wanted you to have a tab already set up. And in case you're a school organization, this is the tab you're going to want to use for a more traditional school program. So let's dive into the summary page. I have given you 3 years to forecast out. More than that is completely unrealistic. Focus on year 1 and year 2 at the moment. Now, when you get good at this, you'll be ready to pull out a month-by-month version of this, which is really great if you have ongoing programs throughout the year. If you're a school program, your month-by-month view won't be so relevant because basically your students are contracting with you for a full year. And so your month by month, you don't have many levers to change month by month in your revenue stream. So let's break it down. And I'm going to get really basic with some terms here. Now, financial forecasting can be confusing because different financial people and accountants use different terms for things. So I'm just going to define the ones I've used here. Revenue. That means money coming in. I think it's helpful, unless you have a ton of programs, to just see the basic revenue that each program is bringing in this summary view. If you have a lot of programs, then just use the tab view to drill into each program and stick to your total revenue from all of those programs. Then we have program expenses. These are the direct expenses that are incurred by running the program. Think of it this way. If you didn't have the program, you wouldn't have these expenses. Sometimes these expenses can be on a per person or per class or whatever the unit of service you provide is. These expenses in a for-profit world are often called cost of goods sold. But in this case, I think it's easier to think about them as your direct program expenses. Then we have your gross revenue. In this case, gross revenue means your program revenue minus your direct program expenses. That's how much money you have to run the rest of your organization and to provide the labor for that program. Now, here's where I hope things get more meaningful. It's really, really valuable to look at percentages, because when we look at, say, 761,250 versus 825,100, what do we really know about those two numbers? How much bigger are they? To me, honestly, 825,000 looks much bigger than 761,000. When I look at it as a percentage, I realize that that's not really that much growth from a percentage perspective. And that helps me have a much clearer perception of what's really going on. Are we growing? Are we shrinking? Are we improving? Are we not improving? So make sure that you use these percentages. They're really important. The next thing I like to do is, many times, most of our clients are human service organizations. And human service organizations basically run on people delivering your mission for you, people working with the people who you serve or delivering your programs. So for all of those staff members whose primary function is to deliver your mission and execute these programs, we're going to put their labor costs here. So this is their salaries. Now, you can choose to include their payroll expenses here, like their benefits and the payroll taxes that you pay for them, or you can include those down in your general operating expenses. It doesn't really matter as long as you do it the same every time. Now, here's a number you've probably never seen before. LER stands for Labor Efficiency Ratio, and I think this can be very meaningful for nonprofits, both in tracking their growth and how they think about labor. Let me break this down for you. So basically, this means for every dollar this organization spends on labor, it brings in $2.79 in gross revenue, meaning the money that comes in after the direct program expenses are taken away. So as this number goes up, it means that you are essentially delivering more value, getting more money per person with a higher number. When you start to track this number, though, you'll find that your nonprofit has a very clear pattern, that you will reach your capacity. You'll have a maximum labor efficiency that you can get to generally once you've optimized and optimized. And at that point, you probably will need to hire someone new, at which point your labor efficiency will go back down. Now, one trick with this number is if you hire new people and over a reasonable amount of time, say a few months or however long it takes for them to get to capacity, if this number does not return to what it was before you hired them, you probably have an issue and may have made a bad hire. And then finally, this is what I like to call the contribution margin. And I like this phrase, I didn't make it up, because it makes sense to me. So this is the amount of money that's left over after the cost of running your programs, all the money that comes in for your programs minus the cost. This is the amount of money that's left over to cover your general operating expenses. Now, I say left over, but of course, your general operating expenses are the spine of your nonprofit. So these are incredibly important. Now, it may be, if your nonprofit is funded mostly by fundraising efforts, it is possible that your contribution margin will be a negative number. So coming down to your general operating expenses, what I want you to notice here is this is not a long list of your chart of accounts. The problem is when we look at too many numbers, we get lost in the numbers and we lose the meaning. So I want you to reorganize your chart of accounts with the help of your bookkeeper if you have one, or your accountant, into broad categories that are meaningful for your nonprofit. Now here I've suggested a few that are often true. So your admin and management labor expenses. A rule of thumb that you can use is that if their job is over 50% administrative, even if they're doing program work as well, then you would count them here. Just make sure you don't double count someone's salary between labor and admin/management. and do it consistently each time. If for some reason you have a very accurate time tracking system where you can evenly split someone's labor costs between the percentage that was program labor and the percentage that was administrative labor, you certainly can do that. But if you don't, it's not worth spending extra time to divide someone's salary up between two categories. Here we have outreach and enrollment expenses. You may previously have listed these as marketing expenses, but I think that's a real misnomer for nonprofits. And if you want to read more about that, I encourage you to check out our blog post on what marketing is and what it means for nonprofits at pivotground.com under our blog. Facilities, if you have facilities that you are maintaining, if you own a building, this is going to be an important number for you. If not, you don't need it. And everything else can get lumped under other operating expenses. We only want to see outside of other operating expenses those things that are really levers, essentially, for your organization financially. If you do a lot of travel or if you do a lot of training and development work, that might fall in here. So it might be that instead of facilities, you do a lot of staff development. And that might be a major lever for your organization. And sometimes it can be very true that the more you spend, the more you bring in, and the healthier your nonprofit is, and the more mission you're able to deliver. So finally, we're down to some smaller numbers. My favorite, getting the numbers smaller helps us really understand if we're growing or shrinking, if we're healthy or not. So we want to look at our total operating expenses as a percentage of the total program revenue. This helps us know how balanced we are between our operating expenses and our program expenses. There's no hard and fast rule. There's no about what this number should be. You just want to think about it from the perspective of your organization and understand your own trends. It may very well be that by increasing this percentage, your nonprofit begins to thrive. Or it might be that you have kind of an inefficient operating function, in which case you're probably spending too much money in this area and you may need to bring this number down. So you want to connect the dots between thinking critically about how well are we operating versus, what is our trend for growing or shrinking this number. And here's my old friend, the labor efficiency ratio. This time we're looking at your administrative/general management wages. And so again, this is for every dollar we spend on administrative expenses. In this case, we're bringing in $1.63 in revenue. I hope that this brings about kind of a mindset shift for you to think about spending money on management or administration may very well increase your ability to bring in revenue. Then we have our net operating income. Net and gross get thrown around interchangeably often. I just like to use net as the end of the day, your revenue minus all of the expenses that come out, basically the general recurring expenses like the direct labor expenses, the direct program expenses, and then all of these operating expenses. Remember, you can always check the formula in a box by double-clicking on it, whether you're in Excel or in Google Sheets. So in this case, the contribution margin has those other expenses taken out, and then we've taken the contribution margin minus the additional operating expenses. And guess what? Here, it's a negative. That may very well be true for your organization. That's where we're going to take a look at the fundraising income. And this might be different than you've done it before. I like to think about what is the true self-sustaining cost of your nonprofit without your fundraising engine. So we have a good understanding of that. And that's why I don't include fundraising income until we have taken a look at your net operating income without fundraising. Now, you may be having a capital campaign or something like that, or like a one-time grant that's come in for something special, a project that you wouldn't have done otherwise. I have not included that in this section. This is for your basic recurring fundraising income, the type of income you're going to expect year after year. So we have our total fundraising income, our total fundraising expense, our fundraising labor, Don't forget to count that. A lot of people don't count their fundraising labor if you have a development officer or a team working on it, and that can really show whether or not you're being efficient. You can have a whole separate budget built into another tab here, and if you have a full fundraising department, I encourage you to do that. But in this template, for simplicity, we have left a separate tab out and just included the overall numbers here. So this is your net fundraising income. That's your income minus your expenses. And here are the numbers we need to look at. What's your return on investment? So basically, for how much money you spend on fundraising, how good of a return do you get? 61.5%, that's great. 35% return, less good, but not so bad. And then another way of looking at basically that same kind of number is, what is your cost to raise $1? So in this case, it costs 39 cents to raise $1. So for every dollar you want to raise, you should plan to spend that 39 cents to raise that dollar. All right, let's finish up the remaining details here. We have other recurring income. You probably have some items like this that probably your accountant will tell you about: investment income, depreciation, and interest expenses. You could potentially have interest income if you loaned somebody money. These are just the kind of miscellaneous pieces we want to make sure we get in there. And finally, we have our net income after adding in the fundraising income and these other recurring income and expenses. And again, we're back to our percentages. So this is our net income as a percentage of our total revenue. This is our net income as a percentage of our gross revenue. That's our program revenue minus our direct program expenses. If you have any special projects, for example, if you are running a capital campaign, list that here. You can list, and you can copy these lines to add in special projects. And the reason why these are completely separate is typically these have their own budgets, and you don't want these to mess with your trends because they often have restricted revenue, although they may have technically unrestricted revenue, and we'd like to know that just in case there's an emergency. They have their own expenses, and they're kind of like a one-off deal, not a recurring situation. And finally, what I'm sure you're not calculating is your target salary adjustments. You'll see in this Human Services tab that we've listed your salaries, and if you are underpaying yourself or anyone in your organization, you're going to indicate what they should be being paid at a market rate, or the rate that it would cost to replace them if something catastrophic were to happen. And then we want to know, what would our net income after this adjustment be? And what would it look like as a percentage of revenue and a percentage of gross revenue? This isn't going to affect your cash flow or the reality of your organization today, but it's really sobering, I think, to know just how underwater you'd be if you were paying yourself a market wage, or how far you need to come to get to paying yourself a market wage, which I truly believe every nonprofit can attain if it follows the impact method. Let's dive in quickly to these specific tabs so you can see what's in there and know how to use them. And then I encourage you to go ahead, make this template your own, and if you want, feel free to send it to me and I'd be happy to take a look. And you can schedule a meeting on our website, pivotground.com. So if you're a school program, lucky you. The reason why is typically your students, right, are going to go from whatever your first grade level is to your second grade level to your third grade level. So you'll see this class of 12 at first grade, the next year will be over here, and the next year will be over here. I've set up the formula to do that. Now you may have an attrition rate that you've established, in which case you can say, instead of just equals C7, you can say equals C7 plus C7 times, let's say your attrition rate is 5%. So times 0.05, that would be 5%. or you can use 5 and the percentage thing. And that would give you the kind of shrinking class size. But for now, I'll just leave it as simple that the grades, kids move up a grade. The reason why this is so great is this can tell you, you can project much farther out. So if you are a school, let's say, you go through 6th grade, you're like kindergarten through 6th grade, it means you could really project out a lot longer, potentially like 7 years if it's kindergarten through 6th grade. And so I would encourage you to do so. And what you can see is that your enrollment here, we had some low enrollment here. We didn't actually do marketing. We just let this low enrollment age out and focused on keeping the lower grades full to capacity. And so everything went up without a huge kind of marketing overhaul. Otherwise, you want to look then at your total revenue from tuition. That's kind of per grade there. Your additional revenue from fees, if you have additional fees. Your program restricted revenue, if you have any, that may be government funding that comes in specifically for your programs or whatever that is if you have restricted revenue. Scholarships that you've given away, we want to take those out, and any discounts that you've offered in tuition or other types of discounts. And so this is your total program revenue. And then your specific direct expenses for your school programs. This is probably something like classroom supplies, field trips, curriculum expenses. You should make this your own, whatever is most relevant for your program. And so then we get our gross revenue after we've taken out the expenses, and our gross revenue as a percentage of the total revenue. And then we want to look at the direct program labor. I've just put in some sample salaries here and tallied them all up. And finally, we get the contribution margin. That's the amount of money that's left over to run the operations of your school here, specifically for this program. And finally, this is where it gets pretty exciting for me at least, is we want to put in some key mission metrics. These are some things that help us link the money to delivering your mission. So here, as 2 examples, and I think these are great ones for schools to consider, is your cost to serve 1 student per year. That's really helpful. And your labor efficiency ratio for your teachers. So again, this is for every dollar you spend on labor, this is how much revenue comes in. So that can be a really helpful number too. There's certainly other things you could measure here. If you're able to track graduation rate, you could talk about cost to take a student through all of your grades through graduation. There's lots of other things you could connect in here, but this is a great place to start looking at those numbers. Let's hop over. If you're not a school, it's going to be very similar, but you're not going to have that grade level breakdown. So we want a program enrollment. I like to just put the number here because often that's very relevant. And fees collected from clients, fees collected from government, restricted revenue from grants. So basically, if you get a contract, if you get paid per person or you get a lump sum to run this program, that's going to go under here. Same deal with the grants essentially here. And then, of course, if you collect any money directly from your clients, that's going to go up here. And if you have any discounts or scholarships, we want to account for that. Get a total program revenue. Again, direct program expenses. As an example, I've chosen supplies, snacks, and transportation. Again, make this your own. Add in lines if you need to. And this is your gross revenue, your total program revenue minus your total program expenses. And then again, we have your gross revenue as a percentage of revenue, your direct program labor, your contribution margin, and some more sample key mission metrics. Here I've chosen to consider the cost per day per client. If you have like a monthly program, a cost per month per client. Your labor efficiency ratio, that's so relevant for thinking about how your programs run. And again, you may find that adding more staff or paying staff more can potentially make this number better. It's not always about saving money, spending less. Sometimes it's about taking action to bring in more. Number of clients referred to program B. So in this case, I'd love you to think about, you may have a program that kind of is more out there in the community and gets people engaged. It might be very easy for people to get involved with your program, but where you really change people's lives might be in this other program, program B. And so a great way to think about your programs in that case is program A is like a feeder program for program B. It's almost your marketing enrollment engine for program B. In which case, you probably want to look at the number of clients out of our total here. We had, 45 clients total. 15 got referred to program B. And then we can look at our cost per client referred to program B. So now instead of just thinking about, okay, this program is great, and for every $6.23 that we raise or someone gives us or that we spend, we can serve a client. But maybe our more important mission is how much it costs to get people into that other program. It doesn't even have to be a program within your organization. And this might be a really meaningful number to build a fundraising argument around, or just to really demonstrate the powerful impact of your program. I'm going to skip program B because it's basically just a copy. I just wanted, if you're not so spreadsheet savvy, to have something that was already linked up. And finally, here's our human expense tab. You certainly could add your contract workers if you have a lot of them in here. To keep things simple for getting you started, I've just left it at salaried employees. So basically we have what is their actual annual salary, and what is their target salary. So target, there's a few ways you can consider this. You can look up the kind of market rate for that type of position. If you can find that. Sometimes that's very easy to do in the for-profit industry. It's a little harder in the nonprofit space because people don't focus on it quite as much. So if you can't, I want you to think about, what would it cost to replace this person? And so often, like, employee A might be underpaid because he or she is really doing a lot of extra volunteer work for your organization in addition to what they're getting paid for. So think about, if that person were to disappear off the face of the planet, I won't say that they died, we'll just say that they moved on and left you in the lurch. What would it take to hire someone to really do the actual job they've been doing? So that's two ways to think about what this target is. And so then here's our actual payroll and here's our target payroll. And here we're just looking at basically the difference. So how far off the target are we? So in my sample nonprofit, we're actually getting better and better. People are getting closer to their target. And that's going to link up to our summary page, where we can see just how far off we are. This is a great way to think about too, if you're fundraising, to say, what is our true cost? Our true cost is really this. This is what's left over. Our true cost of salaries is $165,000. And so we really need to fundraise around this number, not around this number. Or if we count how much how much is given to us in volunteer hours, we want to think about this extra. We don't want to lose this extra $45,000 that essentially our small team here of 1, 2, 3, 4 people is donating to our organization each year by being underpaid. They're really giving a gift in kind. So that is our nonprofit budget template. I encourage you, if you're not a numbers person, be brave, give it a try, put your numbers in here. It's really amazing what you can learn. And if you're at all nervous about it, please feel free to reach out and schedule a call with us. We'd be happy to go over your nonprofit.